Jason straightened his uniform and adjusted his badge as he walked into the bustling courthouse, the sound of shuffling papers and murmuring voices filling the hall. He had been assigned to his first major trial, and his chest swelled with confidence. Everyone told him to be careful, to respect the judge, but he believed he could handle anything. In his mind, he was clever, smart enough to outthink anyone in the courtroom. Today, he would prove it not just to the seasoned officers watching, but to himself. As he stepped into the courtroom, his eyes scanned the space. The gallery was packed with spectators, journalists with cameras ready, and the jury seated in their rows, whispering quietly to one another. He spotted the defendant, a nervous young man, sitting rigid in the dock, glancing around with fear in his eyes. Jason smirked to himself, imagining how easily he could control the proceedings. Then, his attention shifted to the judge. Judge Monica Brooks sat behind the bench, her posture calm and regal. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and observant, and she wore a quiet authority that filled the room. Jason had heard stories about her, about how she had handled difficult cases and outwitted the most cunning attorneys, but he dismissed them in his mind. He thought of himself as clever, as someone who could manipulate the trial to make himself look good. He imagined the headlines, how he could impress his colleagues, and maybe even earn a promotion for being bold. He walked to his position near the witness stand, his movements precise, but his confidence radiated from every gesture. When the first witness, a nervous clerk who had seen part of the crime, was called, Jason wasted no time. He began his questioning with sharp, pointed questions, interrupting and twisting words, trying to create doubt, trying to trap the witness into saying something that would make the defendant look guilty or helpless. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a serious tone that he thought sounded intimidating, confident that every eye in the courtroom was on him. The witness hesitated, fidgeting with the papers in front of them, but Jason interpreted it as fear, proof that his plan was working. The jury's eyes followed him, and he could sense the spectators holding their breath as he pressed harder, believing he was in control. Yet, while Jason focused on projecting dominance, Judge Brooks sat silently, watching everything. She did not interrupt, did not flinch, but her eyes followed his every move, taking in the angles, the body language, the words he chose, the pauses, and the arrogance in his tone. Jason, blinded by his own confidence, did not notice how her lips curved slightly in a knowing smile, how her head tilted as she measured his performance. He assumed that her silence was passivity, that she was perhaps impressed, or even intimidated by him. But the courtroom was a complex chessboard, and Judge Brooks had already seen his opening move. As he continued, he leaned closer to the witness, lowering his voice even more, attempting a sharp trick question, expecting them to falter. His colleagues whispered to each other, impressed by his boldness, while some of the more experienced officers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing his overconfidence. Jason felt unstoppable, convinced he was winning the trial before it had barely begun. Then, as he paused, waiting for the witness to falter, Judge Brooks finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and clear, yet it carried an authority that filled every corner of the courtroom. "Officer," she said, raising an eyebrow in that subtle but unmistakable way that could cut through arrogance, "you may have overlooked something important." The words struck like a hammer. The room fell silent instantly. The gallery, the jury, the spectators, everyone froze mid-breath. Jason's confident smirk faltered. He blinked, unsure what she meant. His mind raced. Had he missed a piece of evidence? Had he misread the witness? The air in the courtroom grew heavy with tension. Even the witness hesitated, uncertain how to respond. Jason felt his face flush, a mix of panic and disbelief. The silence stretched on as Judge Brooks looked at him calmly, deliberately, giving him the weight of her gaze. The spectators leaned forward, the officers murmured quietly, and the jury shifted in their seats. For the first time, Jason realized that he might not be as clever as he thought. The arrogance that had carried him into the courtroom suddenly seemed fragile, exposed under the calm scrutiny of the judge. The audience in the courtroom felt it too, the suspense rising with every second. Everyone wondered, did the rookie officer really make a mistake? Had he underestimated Judge Brooks? And if he had, what would happen next? The stage was set for a confrontation that would not just test his skill, but his pride, his courage, and perhaps even his entire career. The tension was palpable, the first 5 to 7 minutes of the trial already proving that this would not be an ordinary day in court. And as Jason looked up at the judge, trying to regain his composure, he realized that the real test had just begun, and that Judge Brooks was already several moves ahead. Jason's mind raced as he tried to recover from Judge Brooks' calm interruption. He had thought himself in control, but now he felt a flicker of doubt. The courtroom waited silently, every eye fixed on him, the air thick with tension. He straightened his back, trying to mask his panic with a confident tone, and continued his questioning of the witness. But his words stumbled. He had planned his questions carefully, yet Judge Brooks' comment made him second-guess every move. The witness, a clerk who had been nervous from the start, now looked more composed, sensing Jason's uncertainty. The young officer pressed on, trying to regain dominance, speaking faster, leaning closer, hoping to intimidate the witness into revealing something useful. Yet the more he pushed, the more he tripped over his own sentences. Each word came out jagged, awkward, betraying his unease. Judge Brooks remained silent, her eyes sharp and calculating, watching every flinch, every hesitation. The jury shifted in their seats, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Even some of the courtroom staff exchanged glances, sensing the rookie's confidence was faltering. Jason's colleagues whispered to each other, impressed at first by his boldness, but now a few shook their heads, sensing trouble. The witness cleared their throat and answered calmly, carefully choosing words that did not play into Jason's trap. Each time Jason tried to catch them in a contradiction, they responded with clarity and patience, forcing him to stumble again. The more he tried, the more the courtroom noticed his struggle. Jason's face flushed as he realized his plan to impress everyone was unraveling. His mind raced for a new angle, something to turn the trial in his favor, but the words escaped him. Judge Brooks finally leaned forward, resting her hands lightly on the bench. Her gaze did not waver, yet it carried a quiet authority that seemed to freeze Jason in place. "Officer Jason," she said, her voice calm but firm, "are you certain your understanding of the evidence is complete?" The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Jason swallowed, trying to answer, but the words came out shaky. The spectators leaned forward, sensing the tension rising, whispering to one another. Jason could feel the weight of every eye on him, the jury watching his every move, the media recording every detail, and the defendant's anxious face staring at him as if hoping he would fail. He realized, with growing dread, that he had underestimated the judge. She was not merely observing, she was guiding, testing, and exposing the cracks in his arrogance. A bead of sweat ran down his temple as he frantically reviewed the evidence in his mind. He had believed his knowledge was thorough, his plan flawless, but now he noticed details he had ignored, discrepancies that Judge Brooks had quietly pointed out. He tried to regain composure, straightening his tie, clearing his throat, and attempting to speak with authority. "Your Honor, I believe the witness is mistaken in part of their statement." He paused, realizing that even that sounded uncertain. Judge Brooks raised an eyebrow, her expression unchanged. "Officer," she said slowly, letting the words hang, "do you truly believe that overlooking these details will serve justice, or merely your pride?" The courtroom fell silent again. Jason's colleagues glanced at each other, and even some of the spectators murmured. The jury leaned forward, waiting. The witness remained calm, almost smug, knowing the rookie officer was under the judge's scrutiny. Jason's chest tightened. He had come in thinking he could outsmart a judge, manipulate witnesses, and impress everyone, but now he felt small, exposed, and vulnerable. He realized the trial was not a stage for his ego, it was a test of skill, judgment, and honesty, and he had already faltered. Desperation crept into his mind. He searched for an angle, a question, anything to regain the upper hand. But every move he considered seemed weaker than the last. The courtroom waited, tension electric, every second stretching into eternity. Judge Brooks, ever calm, let him struggle for a few moments longer, allowing him to grasp the weight of his own arrogance. Finally, she spoke again, her voice calm, yet cutting through the tension like a blade. "Officer Jason, let this courtroom remind you, respect, attention to detail, and integrity are far stronger than boldness and ego. You may wish to remember that before your next question." Jason froze completely, the words sinking into him. He realized he had been reckless, too focused on showing off rather than seeking the truth. His smirk had vanished. The audience sensed the shift, the suspense thickening as they wondered, could the rookie recover, or would his mistakes unravel the case entirely? He swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. The witness looked at him with quiet confidence, no fear, no hesitation. Jason knew, in that instant, that he had to think carefully. Every word, every gesture now mattered. The courtroom had fallen silent, the air charged with suspense, as everyone waited for his next move. Jason's hand shook slightly as he reached for his notes, realizing that the trial had changed. No longer was it a stage for arrogance. Now, it was a battle of wits against a judge who could see far deeper than he had imagined. And in that quiet moment, the audience, the jury, the gallery, and even Jason himself knew that the real challenge had only just begun. Jason stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing as Judge Brooks' words echoed in the courtroom. The silence was heavy, almost deafening, and every eye in the room seemed to bore into him, waiting for him to make a move. He could feel the tension building like a storm about to break. The witness, calm and composed, gave him a faint, almost imperceptible smile, as if sensing the rookie officer's inner panic. Jason tried to steady his hands, gripping his notes tightly, hoping the papers would give him some confidence, some control. He cleared his throat and spoke, his voice firmer than he felt, but the words sounded hollow to his own ears. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear," he began, "and it proves that the defendant—" He trailed off as Judge Brooks interrupted with a soft, deliberate "Officer Jason, please clarify what you mean by clear." The courtroom collectively held its breath. The jury leaned forward, and the spectators whispered among themselves. Jason's confidence wavered. He realized she was not just challenging him, she was forcing him to examine every word, every claim, every assumption he had made. He looked at the evidence again, scanning the files, searching for a detail he had missed, something to regain control. But the more he searched, the more inconsistencies he saw. The witness had answered honestly, yet Jason's questions had twisted their words, making him appear careless rather than clever. Judge Brooks' eyes, steady and unwavering, seemed to pierce through him, seeing past the arrogance and into his thought process. He swallowed hard, realizing that he had underestimated not only her skill but also the entire courtroom. He had thought this trial would be an opportunity to show his cleverness, but it had become a test of patience, intelligence, and composure. Jason took a deep breath and tried again, attempting to reframe his questions carefully, this time thinking about clarity and logic rather than intimidation. "Can you describe exactly what you saw on the night of the incident?" he asked, softer this time, letting the witness speak without interruption. The witness nodded and began recounting the events in precise detail. Jason listened intently, noting the subtleties he had overlooked before. Judge Brooks observed quietly, her calm demeanor making Jason feel both exposed and challenged. Each pause, each hesitation, each word spoken by the witness seemed amplified in the silent courtroom. Jason realized that his earlier attempts to dominate the trial had blinded him to the truth. The audience felt the suspense growing with every passing moment, as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see whether he would fail completely or find a way to recover. Jason shifted slightly, glancing at the jury, hoping to gauge their reaction. Some looked skeptical, some curious, and some impressed by his persistence, even if flawed. He knew that any mistake now could ruin his credibility. He had to be careful. Judge Brooks spoke again, her tone gentle but firm. "Officer Jason, what you are attempting is admirable, but remember that justice requires more than confidence. It requires understanding, careful listening, and respect for the facts." Jason felt a pang of humility. Her words, though calm, carried the weight of experience and wisdom, something he had not yet learned. He nodded slightly, adjusting his approach. This time, he asked his questions with patience, allowing the witness to speak fully, and carefully noting each detail. The courtroom seemed to relax slightly, though the tension never fully lifted. Every person present could sense the shift in Jason's demeanor from arrogance to cautious respect. He was learning, slowly, painfully, that a courtroom was not a stage for ego, but a place for truth. As the witness finished recounting the events, Jason realized that he had missed an important clue earlier, something subtle in their story. His eyes widened as he connected the dots, seeing how the evidence aligned in a way he had not understood before. Judge Brooks noticed the change in him and gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, acknowledging that he was beginning to comprehend the complexity of the case. The audience, sensing the turning point, leaned in closer, captivated by the unfolding drama. Jason felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had entered the courtroom seeking to prove himself, but now he understood that he had to serve justice above all else. He straightened, took a deep breath, and prepared to continue his questioning with a new focus, one of precision, respect, and attention to detail. The suspense in the room grew even more intense as Judge Brooks waited silently, allowing him to demonstrate whether he had truly learned from his mistakes or whether his arrogance would still lead him astray. Every spectator, every juror, every colleague in the room could feel the tension, the uncertainty, the anticipation. Jason had changed, but the trial was far from over. The next move he made would reveal whether he was capable of thinking clearly under pressure or if he would crumble under the judge's calm scrutiny. And in that silent moment, the audience knew that the courtroom drama had only just begun, that the rookie officer's fate hung in the balance, and that the story's suspense would keep them glued to every word. The courtroom held its breath as Jason tried to regain his composure, but the tension hung heavy like a storm cloud ready to break. Judge Brooks' calm gaze never left him, and he felt the weight of her experience pressing down on every word he spoke. He adjusted his notes again, trying to focus on the evidence, but his mind kept wandering back to her quiet authority, the way she had dismantled his confidence with just a few words. He had thought he could control the trial, impress the jury, and make the witnesses falter, but now he realized he was being tested in ways he had never imagined. The next witness was called a senior detective who had been on the scene during the investigation, and Jason's heart raced. He tried to prepare, thinking he could catch the detective in a contradiction, but Judge Brooks' subtle nod to the witness told him she was guiding the testimony carefully, making sure the truth came out. Jason began his questioning, his voice steadier than before, but still cautious. "Detective, can you confirm the sequence of events that night?" he asked, hoping to maintain some control. The detective replied clearly, without hesitation, describing details Jason had overlooked in his own notes. Each fact challenged his assumptions, each answer exposed the gaps in his reasoning, and he felt a flicker of panic rising in his chest. The jury leaned forward, sensing the tension, the spectators whispering quietly to each other. Jason tried to push forward, hoping to regain dominance, but Judge Brooks spoke before he could finish. "Officer, are you certain that your interpretation of the evidence aligns with the facts as presented?" Her tone was calm, almost gentle, yet it cut through him like a blade. Jason's mind scrambled. Every argument he had prepared seemed weaker now, every tactic he had planned seemed shallow. He realized, painfully, that he had underestimated not only the judge but the entire process of justice. The detective continued, calmly answering questions, and Jason noticed how precise and deliberate her statements were. Judge Brooks allowed Jason to question for a few moments, then raised a hand, signaling him to pause. "Officer Jason," she said slowly, letting the words linger, "it appears that your focus has been on impressing others rather than understanding the facts. Do you see that?" Jason swallowed hard. His cheeks burned with embarrassment. He had entered the courtroom thinking he could outsmart everyone, and now he felt exposed, like a child caught in a lesson he did not want to learn. The courtroom seemed to grow quieter, the air thick with anticipation. The spectators, the jury, and even the other officers sensed that something significant was happening. Jason knew that one wrong move now could ruin not only this case but his entire career. He shifted his stance, trying to steady his voice, and asked another question, more carefully this time. The detective answered, and Jason finally noticed a subtle detail, a small contradiction, not in the facts, but in how they had been interpreted. His eyes widened as he realized the implications. Judge Brooks, noticing his sudden focus, leaned slightly forward, her calm expression unchanged but her gaze sharp. "Officer," she said quietly, "what have you just discovered?" Jason's mind raced. He realized that this was his chance to prove he had learned something, to show that he could think critically under pressure rather than relying on arrogance. He took a deep breath and addressed the judge and the courtroom with renewed clarity. "Your Honor," he began, his voice firmer, "I see now that my earlier approach overlooked important details. The evidence shows a sequence of events I misinterpreted, and I must adjust my questioning accordingly." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The spectators and jury sensed the shift. Jason had moved from arrogance to humility, from reckless confidence to careful thought. Judge Brooks nodded subtly, a small smile of approval on her face. She allowed him to continue, and Jason asked questions with precision, guiding the witness carefully, listening attentively, and taking notes diligently. Each answer built a clearer picture of the events, and he felt a small surge of satisfaction, not from dominating the trial, but from understanding the facts. Yet, the suspense did not end there. Judge Brooks' eyes narrowed slightly as she prepared to reveal a critical piece of information, something that could change the course of the trial entirely. The audience leaned forward in anticipation, sensing that the next revelation would either make or break Jason. He glanced at her, knowing that whatever came next would test his newfound humility and skill. The detective hesitated, then produced a report that Jason had never seen before, a report that contradicted part of his initial assumptions. His heart pounded. Judge Brooks allowed the pause to stretch, letting everyone feel the tension. Jason's mind worked furiously to interpret the information. The courtroom waited in suspense. Spectators gasped quietly, jurors exchanged glances, and even seasoned officers seemed tense. Jason realized that this moment could define him, whether he would rise to the challenge or falter under pressure. He took another deep breath, prepared to confront the unexpected evidence, aware that Judge Brooks' calm and deliberate strategy had him exactly where she wanted him. The courtroom fell silent once more, the anticipation so thick it felt like it could be touched. Jason squared his shoulders, lifted his gaze, and prepared to speak, knowing that the next words he chose could either save the case or shatter his confidence completely. Jason's heart raced as he stared at the report the detective had just handed over, his mind spinning to make sense of the new information. Every instinct told him this was a trap, a test, yet he knew it was real. Judge Brooks' calm eyes watched him, unblinking, weighing his next move. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Jason swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every eye on him, the jury, the spectators, even his fellow officers. He could feel his confidence crumbling, but he forced himself to think clearly. He adjusted his posture, lifted his chin, and tried to appear composed. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steadier than he felt, "this report contradicts some of the initial statements. I need to clarify." Judge Brooks inclined her head slightly, encouraging him to proceed. Jason turned to the detective, asking specific questions about the discrepancies, trying to stay precise, careful not to make any mistakes. Each answer revealed more layers he hadn't considered. His earlier arrogance, the rush to impress, felt like a distant memory. He realized that the trial required understanding, logic, and patience, not bluster. Yet the tension in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing moment. Spectators leaned forward, whispering to each other, the jury exchanged glances of anticipation, and Jason felt the pressure mounting. Every move he made now could either salvage his credibility or destroy it entirely. As he questioned the detective, a small but critical detail emerged, a date and a timestamp that did not match any of the previous reports. His eyes widened as he realized the significance. Judge Brooks noticed the reaction and raised a calm eyebrow. "Officer Jason," she said softly, "what have you just uncovered?" Jason paused, considering his words carefully. He knew that speaking too quickly could ruin him, but staying silent could make him appear unprepared. He took a deep breath and replied, "Your Honor, it appears that some earlier assumptions were incorrect. The timeline of events has been misunderstood. This detail changes the interpretation of the evidence." The courtroom erupted with quiet murmurs. The witnesses exchanged looks, and even the spectators seemed tense, sensing the shift. Jason continued, feeling a strange combination of fear and focus. He asked more questions, piecing together the true sequence of events, each answer bringing him closer to understanding the case fully. Judge Brooks observed silently, letting him work through the evidence, her calm presence keeping him in check. Jason realized that her silence was not passive, it was a test of his ability to think under pressure, to adapt, and to take responsibility for his mistakes. He felt sweat bead on his forehead, but he pressed on. As he connected the dots, a realization struck him. The discrepancies he had ignored earlier could have led to a wrongful accusation. His stomach twisted at the thought. He glanced at the jury, sensing the curiosity and tension in their eyes. He also felt the weight of the defendant's gaze, trust and fear intertwined. Jason swallowed hard and addressed the courtroom with a newfound humility. Your Honor, members of the jury, I now see that the facts must guide our understanding, not my assumptions. I will proceed carefully and honestly to uncover the truth. The spectators leaned in, captivated by his shift from arrogance to diligence. Judge Brooks allowed a small nod, acknowledging his awareness. Yet, just as Jason began to feel a sense of control, Judge Brooks dropped another subtle bombshell. She pointed to a piece of evidence previously overlooked, a witness statement that contradicted the detective's account in a minor but important way. The courtroom gasped quietly. Jason froze, realizing that even now, he was being challenged, tested for his ability to handle unexpected revelations. He turned to the new witness, careful to maintain composure. His questions were measured, precise, respectful, reflecting his growth in the trial so far. Each answer built a fuller picture, yet the tension remained. The spectators whispered among themselves, caught up in the suspense, while the jury's expressions ranged from curiosity to astonishment. Jason felt his mind sharpening, focusing solely on the facts, leaving his pride and ego behind. Judge Brooks watched closely, her calm demeanor hiding the satisfaction of a teacher seeing a student finally learn the lesson. Jason realized that this trial was no longer about winning or impressing anyone, it was about seeking truth and justice. The suspense in the courtroom reached a peak. Every participant sensed that the outcome depended not on luck, but on Jason's ability to continue navigating the surprises the case presented. He felt a strange thrill, a mixture of fear and determination. He had been humbled, but that humility had given him clarity. He asked the final series of questions, carefully linking the evidence, the witnesses, and the timeline. Slowly, the truth began to emerge, and Jason could see how Judge Brooks had guided him to this point, not to humiliate him, but to teach him the importance of skill, patience, and respect. The courtroom remained silent, tense, as he presented his findings. The spectators were riveted, the jury attentive, and Jason himself aware that every detail mattered. Judge Brooks' calm eyes met his, and he understood that he had survived the twist not because of arrogance, but because he had learned to adapt, to listen, and to think critically. And in that moment, the suspense was almost unbearable, as everyone realized that the rookie officer had faced the unexpected, survived the test, and had the chance to redeem himself fully, though the trial was far from over. Jason stood in the courtroom, his hands still trembling slightly, feeling the weight of the trial pressing down on him. Judge Brooks' calm gaze never left him, and he knew that every move he made now could define his career. The tension was electric, spectators leaned forward in their seats, jurors exchanged quiet glances, and even the other officers in the room held their breath. Jason had come into the trial full of confidence, eager to impress, to outsmart everyone, but now he understood how wrong he had been. His arrogance had crumbled under Judge Brooks' quiet authority, and he had learned the hard way that a courtroom was not a stage for ego, but a place for truth. The detective and witnesses had answered carefully, their words precise and deliberate, forcing him to confront every mistake he had made. He took a deep breath and straightened his posture, focusing on the facts, not on impressing anyone. Judge Brooks finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying a weight that filled the room. "Officer Jason," she said, "today you have been tested not by the witnesses or the evidence, but by your own assumptions. Confidence without understanding is dangerous. Do you see that now?" Jason swallowed hard, nodding slowly. The courtroom was silent, everyone hanging on his response. He realized she was giving him a chance to reflect, to acknowledge his mistakes, and to grow from them. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "I see it now. I let my pride guide me instead of the facts. I understand that my role is to seek the truth, not to impress others." Judge Brooks' expression softened slightly, a small approving nod acknowledging his humility. Yet the suspense did not fade. Jason knew the trial was not over. There were still witnesses to question, evidence to present, and the jury to consider. But now, he approached every moment with careful attention, focusing on clarity and integrity. He asked questions with precision, listening attentively, and ensuring that each word was accurate. The spectators noticed the change. The whispers of excitement and curiosity spread throughout the gallery as they watched the rookie officer transform from an arrogant, overconfident young man into someone serious, aware, and diligent. Even the jury members seemed impressed by his growth, noting the way he had adapted under pressure. Judge Brooks continued to observe silently, allowing Jason to demonstrate his understanding and skill. She knew that this was the most important lesson not just for him, but for everyone in the courtroom, that humility, patience, and respect for facts were far stronger than ego and bravado. Jason's thoughts raced as he reviewed the evidence again, connecting every statement, timeline, and report. Each detail fit into place more clearly than before. He realized how close he had been to making a serious error that could have misled the court. The gravity of that possibility settled heavily on his shoulders, but he used it to fuel his focus, channeling fear into determination. Judge Brooks finally addressed the courtroom, her voice calm but powerful, commanding attention without raising it. This trial, like every case, is a reminder that justice is not won by arrogance or bravado. It is earned through careful observation, respect for the facts, and the courage to admit mistakes when they occur. Jason felt the truth of her words deeply. He knew she was speaking not only to him but to everyone watching, teaching a lesson that transcended the specific trial. The suspense in the room grew as everyone waited to see if Jason could internalize this lesson fully and carry it through the remainder of the trial. He turned to the witnesses, asking the final questions with careful wording, each one precise, measured, and respectful. The detective confirmed the corrected timeline, and the witnesses' statements aligned perfectly. Jason felt a sense of relief, tempered with a newfound respect for the responsibility he carried. Judge Brooks nodded subtly, allowing him to feel the satisfaction of having done the right thing. The courtroom still held its breath, sensing the culmination of tension that had built over the past hours. Jason realized that he had survived not by clever tricks or intimidation, but by humility, patience, and careful thinking. The spectators, now captivated by the drama and growth of the rookie officer, leaned forward, eager to see the final outcome. Jason glanced at the jury, who were taking notes and observing carefully, their expressions showing approval of his diligence and growth. He felt a quiet pride, not in his former arrogance, but in his ability to learn, adapt, and perform under pressure. Judge Brooks' calm authority had guided him to this point, and he knew that her lessons would remain with him throughout his career. Finally, she addressed him directly, her voice steady and commanding respect. "Officer Jason, you have faced unexpected challenges, adapted to them, and demonstrated growth. Remember this lesson: true skill comes not from confidence alone, but from understanding, integrity, and humility." The room remained silent for a heartbeat, then slowly, a wave of acknowledgement spread through the spectators, the jury, and even his colleagues. Jason felt a sense of closure, a recognition that he had endured a trial that tested not only his knowledge but his character. He nodded respectfully, understanding that he had been humbled but also strengthened by the experience. The suspense of the courtroom had shifted from tension and fear to relief and admiration. Jason had survived the challenge, grown as a professional, and earned the quiet respect of everyone present, while Judge Brooks remained the calm, commanding presence who had guided him to this important lesson. And as the trial continued, Jason knew that the real victory was not in proving himself to others, but in proving to himself that he could rise above arrogance, learn from mistakes, and act with intelligence, patience, and integrity, no matter how high the stakes or how silent the courtroom became.